Hi guys, Jason Bodine coming at you once again from Gadsden, Alabama. Welcome back to my channel. This time I'm going to be reacting to a TED Talk given by a woman named Barbara F. Walter called, "Is the U.S. Headed Towards Another Civil War?" But before we get into it, let me ask you guys a quick little favor. Please click that subscribe button to help me grow my channel, and then at the end of this video, if you like what you see, hit that thumbs up button to help me get into the algorithm. Alright, let's get into it. Okay, let me get my headphones on and let's get started with this video.
I'm going to talk about a threat that most people don't want to think about. It's too frightening, and it doesn't seem real. That threat is civil war. Since 1946, over 250 civil wars have broken out, and that number continues to increase. There are now almost 50% more civil wars than there were in 2001. I've been studying civil wars for over 30 years. I've interviewed members of Hamas in the West Bank, ex-Sinn Féin members in Northern Ireland, former...
Okay, let's go ahead and stop here for just a second. This woman is starting by giving her credentials as an expert, and she's already bringing those things into doubt. Do you see how she pronounced that word? It's not Sinn Féin, it's pronounced Sinn Féin, and she doesn't seem to know that, but she is an expert, and she's interviewed them. Okay, let's keep going.
Members of the FARC in Colombia. I've stood on top of the Golan Heights and stared into Syria at the top of the Syrian civil war. I've driven across Zimbabwe as the military was planning its coup against Robert Mugabe. I've been followed and interrogated by members of Myanmar's junta. In 2017, I was asked to serve on a task force run by the CIA called the Political Instability Task Force. One of the goals of that task force was to come up with a model to help the US government predict what countries around the world were likely to experience ethnic conflict and civil war. It turns out that predicting civil war is possible. Solid data exists on where and when these conflicts are likely to break out. It's just that most people don't know that. The task force was comprised of two types of people, experts on civil war like myself and data analysts. The experts came up with 38 different factors that they thought could potentially lead a country towards civil war. And some of those factors seemed obvious, like whether a country was poor, had lots of income inequality, or had a government that heavily discriminated against one particular group. It turns out that only two factors were highly predictive, and they weren't the ones the experts expected. The first was whether a country was an anocracy. Anocracy is just a fancy term for partial democracy. It's a government that's neither fully democratic nor fully autocratic. It's something in between. So think about Hungary today. Hungary holds elections. Hungarians eagerly go out and vote. It's just that whoever wins those elections can basically do whatever they want. The second factor was whether citizens in these anocracies had formed political parties around identity rather than ideology. So rather than joining a party because you were liberal or conservative, capitalist or communist, you joined a party because you were black or white, Christian or Muslim, Serb or Croat. If a country had these two features, the task force considered it at high risk of political violence and put it on a watch list. It was actually called the watch list, and it was sent to the White House. So here I was sitting in a hotel conference room in suburban Virginia 4 times a year with a room full of really smart people, and we talked about countries in Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia. but we never, ever talked about the United States. That's because the CIA is legally not allowed to monitor the United States or its citizens, and that's exactly the way it should be.
Okay, let's stop here for a minute. Did you notice the phrasing of this? She said the CIA is not legally allowed to monitor the United States or its citizens, and that's exactly how it should be. That's what she just said. But remember what happened with another agency, the NSA? They're not allowed to monitor the United States or its citizens either. But do you remember that stuff with Edward Snowden? He exposed that during the Obama administration that the NSA was illegally, against FISA, that's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, spying on American citizens through their cell phones and technology. This was a big scandal, and that's why Edward Snowden is currently living in Russia right now, because he was declared an enemy of the state. So you can't tell me that the government didn't have this information because they're not allowed to surveil the citizens when we know that they surveilled the citizens. But anyway, let's let her continue.
But I was a private citizen, and I had this information, and I could see that both of these factors were emerging in my own country, and they were emerging at a surprisingly fast rate. The U.S.'s democracy has been downgraded 3 times since 2016. 2016, it was downgraded because international election monitors had considered the 2016 election free, but not entirely fair. America's own intelligence agencies had found that the Russians had, in fact, meddled in that election. It was downgraded again in 2019 when the White House refused to comply with requests by Congress for information. And it was downgraded a final time at the end of 2020 when President Trump refused to accept his loss in the 2020 election and actively attempted to overturn the results. Between December of...
Okay, gotta stop her again. First of all, whether Trump is guilty or not is for a jury to decide, not her. And until 12 people in a courtroom say so, he is innocent until proven guilty. That is the way our legal system works. Like him or not. Now, secondly, there is the whole argument that Trump's lawyers give him that this is an issue of free speech, that he had a right to say things that he said. And third, given the history of what happened during the 2016 election with the Democrats and the DNC and Bernie Sanders, it's not hard to believe that Trump could have very easily actually thought there was election interference, even if there wasn't. I mean, it had already been proven. The DNC conspired with Hillary Clinton to make sure Bernie Sanders did not get the nomination in 2016 so that Hillary Clinton would be the Democratic candidate. This was proven. There was a big scandal over it. How quickly she forgets that this happened. And she doesn't even mention it. And, okay, but, yeah, so, it's kind of easy to see. Because and it's not that hard to make people, including Trump himself, think that it happened when it already happened. The DNC was basically acting like a mafia family with Hillary the godmother Clinton at the head of it pulling the strings. But let's let her keep going.
2020 and early 2021, the United States was officially classified as an anocracy. If the task force had been allowed to monitor and study the United States, it likely would have considered it at high risk of political instability and political violence in December of 2020, just a few weeks before the January 6th insurrection, and it likely...
Okay. And once again, it's automatically an insurrection. This lady is showing her leftist leanings. She's there to give a speech on is the United States headed towards another civil war. And she knows that her audience is comprised of people in both camps, Democrat and Republican. And I don't even know if she realized it, but so far to me, it sounds like she is trying to push the country into the very thing that she's talking about trying to prevent. All right, let's go on.
Likely would have put the United States on the watch list. We also know who tends to start civil wars, and again, it's not the people most of us think. It is not the poorest people in society. It is not the people who are most oppressed by their government. The people who tend to start civil wars, especially ethnically based civil wars, are the groups that had once been politically dominant but are in decline. If you think back to the former Yugoslavia, Serbs had enjoyed most of the positions in government and the military throughout the Cold War for decades. But they were the ones who stood to lose the most as Yugoslavia democratized. The Serbs started that war. Iraq's Sunnis similarly enjoyed most of the key positions in the military and in government under Saddam Hussein. But when the United States toppled Saddam Hussein, they also threw the Sunnis out of their positions. It was the Sunnis who started that war. In the United States, the rise of militias has been driven primarily by white men who see America's identity changing in ways that directly threatens their status.
Stopping again. You see what she's doing here? She is, once again, pushing a leftist political agenda. She is blaming it on white men. I'm sorry, but no. Okay, let's start with the whole anocracy thing. The whole dissent, and that started with the aforementioned NSA scandal with under Obama acting like a dictator by allowing the NSA to spy on its citizens, and then again with the DNC acting like a mafia family to rig the election of 2016, to rig the Democratic primaries specifically. And then this woman gets on here and is blaming white men. White men are starting this war. White men were the ones on January 6th. Okay, yes, white people were at January 6th. But, okay, let's look at what has happened in this country since the Obama administration. Okay? Since then, the Democrats have been pushing a progressive liberal agenda. Now, And that has caused division. The division did not come because of what she is claiming, that white people are no longer in positions of power, that they're losing power and influence in this country. It came because the people in power, who back at that time, we had an African American president, were causing the divisions. They were setting everybody up to fight with each other. And just make the conditions in the country worse. You had the whole, the division between white and black and the other races. You had the divisions between Christians and other religions. You had, basically, there was not any group in this country that was not at somebody else's throat. And at the time, the Democrats were always telling them, blaming it all. No, this is the white man's fault. Blame them. Get mad at them. And do something about it. Excuse me. But anyway, it has continued into the Biden administration. It was put on hold during the Trump administration largely. Things got better in this country economically and somewhat, I think, socially. I mean, racism, of course, still existed under Trump. I'm not saying that. But it was a better condition. And since Biden has been in office, they have continued the efforts to drive people apart and to make sure that they would be in conflict. Especially with things like inflation and the pandemic and high gas prices, all that stuff going on. These are the things that lead to a civil war, and they were all put into place, all of it engineered by the Democrats. I'm sorry to tell you this, and I'm saying this as someone who is not, once again, not a Democrat nor Republican. This is just what has been happening. It has all been engineered by the Democrats. And they're using white people, and men in particular, as a scapegoat. And this, to continue that conflict. Basically, if you're a sci-fi fan, they remind me of the Shadows from Babylon 5. And that, not to mention that whole storyline with President Clark after the Shadow War. But anyway, let's let her keep going.
They were the ones who marched on the Capitol on January 6th. So why is this happening now? It's happening now because of demographic change. The United States is in the midst of a major transition from a country whose population is majority white to a country whose population will be majority non-white. The United States will be the first country to go through this, but others are going to follow. Canada is likely to be next, followed by New Zealand, and then the UK, and eventually all the English-speaking countries of the world. This is likely to be especially true if climate change causes citizens from the global south to increasingly move north. These countries are going to be looking to the United States to see how we manage this demographic shift. Americans can allow this transition to tear us apart, or we could use it to come together to show the world how to manage this change, and in the process create a truly multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy. So how do you do this? The first thing we have to do is address the two big risk factors of civil war: anocracy and identity politics. To address anocracy, we have to improve the rule of law. We have to ensure equal access to every citizen to the vote. We have to reduce corruption, and we have to improve the quality of government services. But reforming a government takes time. Those are not easy things to do, and it often seems impossible. That's exactly where the United States is today, almost paralyzed. This is where business can come in. 30 years ago, most of us thought that South Africa was barreling towards civil war. Black South Africans were increasingly protesting the brutality of the white apartheid regime, and the government responded with more brutality. But then something happened. The business community stepped in and demanded real democracy. They did this because they had been suffering under years of crushing economic sanctions. And eventually they had to choose between apartheid and profits, and they chose profits. And when they went to the government and said, "We will no longer support you," the apartheid regime knew it could not survive, and reform happened quickly. The business community can also help address identity politics by investing in those communities that have been left behind by globalization and by free trade agreements like NAFTA. In the United States, it was the working class that disproportionately suffered. Those are the communities that are the most angry and the most resentful today. Businesses can invest in better healthcare, better education, and a higher minimum wage so that they create a group of people who are hopeful about the future and less vulnerable to the calls by extremists to burn the system down.
I'm sorry, got to stop here again. See, here we go. She's already talked about insurrection, now she's talking about extremists, and she's putting it on the white people, right? I'm sorry. What about Black Lives Matter and that whole thing where everybody was burning and looting? Now, I know what that was supposed to be about, but it got hijacked by what it was, an excuse to go out and do damage and terrorize people. And she's just completely ignoring it happened. And this smug look on her face, look at this, like she knows what she's talking about, but I don't really think she does. Let's let her finish.
But there's perhaps an easier solution, at least in the short term. And that is to regulate social media, especially the algorithms that push out the most incendiary and divisive material. I'm not saying that we should censor free speech. Let people put whatever they want on social media, but do not allow the algorithms to amplify the messages by bullies and hate mongers and conspiracy theorists and enemies of democracy. If we take away their bullhorn, their influence will decline. I've interviewed a lot of people who have lived through a civil war, and they all say the same thing. I didn't see it coming. Brina Kovac was a young mother living in Sarajevo at the beginning of the Bosnian Civil War. She told me that in the months and weeks leading up to that war, life seemed normal. She went to work. She took weekend holidays with her husband. They went to the weddings of their friends. But then one night in March of 1992, when she was at home with her newborn son, the lights suddenly went out. And then, she said, you started to hear machine guns. It doesn't have to be this way. We know an enormous amount about why these terrible wars start. We know that the people intent on violence have a playbook. We know what that playbook is. But there's no reason why we, the democracy-loving people of this world, can't create our own playbook to prevent civil war. But to do that, we have to be brave enough to fight for real democracy, strong democracy, because only by fighting for democracy can we ensure that we will truly get peace. Thank you.
When I started this video, I was giving Dr. Walter the benefit of the doubt. But right from the beginning, when she mispronounced Sinn Féin, she started giving me doubts about her authenticity. And as the video went on, her motives in giving this speech. To the point that by the end of it, I wasn't sure whether she was being deliberately deceptive or was just incredibly naive in the things that she was saying and the conclusions that she was drawing. I mean, her facial expressions and body language, when you look at it close, it looked to me more like she was going, are they buying it? Rather than, well, this is how it is, and letting it sink in. And it really bothered me. It also bothered me that she left out so much. I mean, she talked about anocracy, but she did not acknowledge that what led to the anocracy went way back before the Trump administration. And she blamed it all on the white people. And she was talking about that it's because of a changing demographic. But no, that's not the case. It all started back when Obama was in office. That started bringing about the changes that we're seeing today that she says has got the CIA so worried about civil war in America. Okay? The working class being oppressed and angry, that started with Obama. Not with Trump, not with Biden. It started with Obama. That was because of the financial strain that Obama was putting on people with Obamacare. These premiums were outrageous, and if you couldn't afford it, you got penalized on your taxes. That pissed people off. And on top of that, Obama spent his entire presidency increasingly alienating the white portion of the population. And he set, and not only that, but he set into place all of the very identity politics, the seeds for it anyway, all of the identity politics that Dr. Walter was talking about. I mean, just look, I mean, I'm the big thing would have been the gay marriage. And that one I am okay with. I'm glad he did that. I think it's deserved that they should be able to marry, that gay people should be able to marry. But the stuff with the transgender stuff in the bathrooms and the whole bathroom thing. And yes, I believe transgender people have rights too. However, that was the seed of what is going on. And then when Biden gets into office, it just got worse. The blacks and whites are at each other's throats. Christians and other religions. You've got the whole transgender thing. You've got and the stuff going on in schools with what was it? Critical race theory. Which just basically is another way of shaming white people for being white, honestly. And also teaching kids about gender identity. Things like that, and it's all basically designed to make kids think a certain way and turn against their parents, which, by the way, is something that Chairman Mao did in China back in the day. That's a communist and socialist tactic. So, yes, all of this, as I said earlier, seems to be engineered. And if Dr. Walter is on the level and not just trying to either be deliberately deceptive and be a con artist, hoping to bank on the similarity of her name to another actual journalist who actually had a brain to think with, we give her the benefit of the doubt that she's on the level, then she's got to be incredibly naive. Because, for one thing, the CIA, they don't tend to be open with what they're doing. So if she is telling all this stuff is going on, it's most likely that they told her what she needed to hear to do what they really wanted to do. And call me a conspiracy theorist if it makes you feel better. I'm not. But when you look at it and the timing of everything, it doesn't just look like the CIA or the government in general wanted to just be able to predict when a civil war would break out. They wanted to see if they could push the American people into wanting one. So, I don't know why. I'm guessing so that they could enact whatever policies they want and blame whoever they wanted for it, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, guys, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please once again click that subscribe button if you haven't already, and like this video to help me get into the algorithm. And I will see you next time. Until then, guys, peace.